Well, good morning. I'm Jeff Coleman.
And I'm Debra Pinkerton. Welcome to Morning Light.
Well, we know thousands of you this morning are feeling the effects of this scorching heat wave, and you're watching events in the Middle East with a lot of anxiety. Our Morning Light panel will tackle both topics today.
But first, here's a preview of what's coming up later in the show. We are highlighting one of the shows on Lighthouse TV. Face the Issues examines topics that include community, politics, healthcare, and finances. You will meet the host, Sam Chen.
And I'm borrowing him for the panelists.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. Well, summer is finally here, and the National Weather Service warns of a dangerous heat dome. Temperatures up to 110 degrees across Pennsylvania. My car reading was 103 yesterday afternoon.
Oh, my goodness.
In the Steel City, they've activated cooling centers. In the city of brotherly love, they're setting up something called a heat line with medical teams standing ready to help when those heat-related illnesses strike. We'd love to hear how you or your church family is checking up on your neighbors all week long. Send us a message on our Facebook or Instagram pages at Morning Light Live. At Morning Light Live. Love to hear how they're reaching out to neighbors in this heat.
Certainly. Well, meanwhile, this morning, all eyes are on the Middle East. This comes after an unprecedented surprise missile attack on 3 Iranian nuclear sites on Saturday night. Operation Midnight Hammer dropped a powerful new bunker-busting bomb from American B-2 stealth bombers. In addition, U.S. Navy submarines launched over 24 cruise missiles. President Donald Trump says the move is a one-off, a reset to drive Iranian leaders back to the peace table and to stop their nuclear program. Iran retaliated and launched missiles on civilian targets in Israel.
It's very hard to look at your phone in the morning because you're waiting for what exactly is hitting your news cycle, and it goes straight to your heart.
It does. I know. My mother called me Saturday night. We were out, and she's like, "Are you watching the TV?"
Yeah, there's a lot of those moments lately.
Absolutely.
Well, when history pivots and regimes fall and others rise, it feels like an overnight event, doesn't it? The Battle of Yorktown during the Revolutionary War, D-Day, Hiroshima in World War II, the fall of Saigon 50 years ago in Vietnam this year. The truth is complicated, though, and often is decades or centuries in the making. But if you believe in God and His plan for the world, then these events should seem much less fearful. If, as theologians argue, He is sovereignly in control over all events, even wars, how does that change our day-to-day reaction to events in Tehran and Tel Aviv and Kyiv and Moscow? How can we look at events from His perspective? We'll take this big question to the Morning Light panel this morning. We've got Alex, Michelle, and a new friend, Sam Chen. I previewed you there, and I can't believe you're actually here in our studio today.
It's been a long time coming. You've been in our studio in Allentown how many times? And time to return the favor.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to start with you, Sam. First, these heat waves are kind of an interesting event because we either talk about them as, well, the weather, and it's easy to talk about the weather with people. Yeah. It is an extra step to actually check on your neighbor in a weather-related event and not just think of yourself. How do you do that? How do you move from just saying, I'm going to stay in, hunker down, drink lemonade, and caring about your neighbor? What do you have to do?
I think you need to be intentional. And I think one of the issues that we have more and more in this world is as social media moves faster and faster, you said earlier about looking at your phone and checking all those news updates. I go through 5 news briefings every morning before I get my day started. There's
before coffee or after coffee?
Well, I don't drink coffee until after 9 o'clock, so it's way before that. But it's when you do that, it's fine. It's great. I need to do it for my job. But what happens is our lives naturally become very rushed. We go from one thing to another, one thing to another. I am thinking about what is happening in Iran before I am thinking about my neighbor. Mm-hmm. And so we need to be intentional because when we're not intentional, the world is intentional for us.
You recognize that? The idea that we're thinking about Iran before we're thinking about people who live next door.
I do. I absolutely can relate to that. And I think that's something that I feel like God always talks to me about. We can get caught up in things and we can be afraid. I think to deny that you're afraid, I think that's probably not the wise thing to do. I think it's better to face it and say, wow, this news is taking me down a path and I am getting consumed with fear, I'm afraid.
That is a very hard line to know when the news is beginning to change your internal makeup, your soul. Like you've actually allowed that bunker-busting bomb of fear to go inside. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to pivot, and because I want to talk about the other big fear. But I want to first read you, Alex, a quote from our good friend C.S. Lewis, who left us 3 years after the bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Lewis said this. Let me read this to you. If we are all going to be destroyed by an atomic bomb, let that bomb, when it comes, find us doing sensible and human things, praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, chatting with our friends over a pint and a game of darts, not huddled together like frightened sheep thinking about bombs. They may break our bodies. A microbe can do that, but they need not dominate our minds. Now, people might say, but that's St. C.S. Lewis here, right? What about us? Like, how can you think about playing music? Because this is a conversation that happens every day. People are like, why aren't you watching the news? Mom calls, dad calls, uncle calls. Why aren't you watching this? How can you be at the concert? How can you be going to church this morning?
Sure.
Big things are happening.
Sure. C.S. Lewis is drawing from this rich Christian tradition of the order of loves that goes back at least as far as Augustine. The idea being that I have an obligation first to God, then to my neighbor, and I handle those neighbors in concentric rings. So I should be thinking about my next door neighbor in theory, in principle, before I'm thinking about a faraway place that I can't do anything tangibly to love. What's interesting is in that quote, he then gives an illustration of that in one of his novels, That Hideous Strength, where there's this big international conspiracy, there's this demonic evil threat, and the protagonists of the story are a group of Christians, and they're just settled in a cottage, and they're just gardening, and they're reading literature, and they're doing these very ordinary, earthy things. That's their act of rebellion against a crazy, chaotic age, is to simply participate in those ordinary daily activities where God makes his grace known to you. I think we need to do that every church, every Sunday in church, as well as prioritize ordinary worship, fellowship with our neighbors, fellow believers, and church members. That's where we're called to show faithfulness first.
That's a beautiful scene. I mean, thinking about this, Sam, when you think about what's happening in places like Pakistan, India, Iraq, Iran, and you see images, every now and then you see an image of people worshiping, or people drinking tea, or kids playing soccer, or in Afghanistan flying kites. All of that feels like it's denying the reality that in a second you could die. But it's kind of the Western experience. We're driving cars every day, and we're not living in fear, but we could die in the car crash. How do you balance the sensibility of having a healthy fear that motivates you and not being disabled by fear? How does the gospel change that?
I think it's so important to remember that peace is not the absence of conflict. Right? That's how we define it. Countries are at peacetime or they're in war. That's what we say in international relations. But peace is not the absence of conflict, something that we have within the conflict. Anxiety, and the scripture is really clear about this. Anxiety is not caused or rooted in our situations. Anxiety is rooted in our incompleteness from God, that sin separates us from God. And so in the Philippians, Paul says what? He says that the peace, it makes us complete.
Yeah,
right? That's where our peace comes from. And so there's a sense in which I wouldn't call it fear, but there should be an understanding of vigilance of what happens around the world.
There's a reality.
Right. We don't want to be
ignorant.
ignorant. No one's calling us to be ignorant. Right. We want to be aware and understanding and vigilant. But our peace and our anxiety isn't rooted in that. And so our peace isn't rooted in those conflicts not happening either. So our peace is rooted in our understanding of who Jesus is. My identity as a Christ follower is where my peace is rooted. That needs to be lived out. Right? We're not if everything that Iran ends today, it's another conflict tomorrow. We both know this, right? And so where does the peace come from? Not from the conflict ending. It comes from us living out that reality of who we are as Christ followers every single day to the neighbors around us.
Michelle, I think there's a sense to what Sam is saying here that, well, if we just do this one thing, right? If we just drop this bomb, if we just make this move, that peace will reign, the doves will be released, and the development teams can come in and rebuild all the things that are broken. Because we're human beings, we think we can do that. But there's this brokenness, and you see this in the daily lives of the people that you work with. Joy, how does joy come in the midst of this kind of conflict, and how do we fight for it? Give us some practical help here.
Well, I think I consider it a privilege to work with the families. I've worked with homeless women and children and women in trauma. I have friends that are in war-torn areas overseas right now, and they're very resilient, and there is joy. So even in the midst of bombs going off or other things happening, they stay focused on the things like enjoying time with their children. It doesn't mean that they don't experience fear. It doesn't mean that they're not afraid when they go out. They're just not letting fear rule them, because you have faith and you have fear. So if we're putting our eyes on Jesus and we're just turning away from what, he says to take every thought captive. So anytime we start to experience something that doesn't feel like joy, it feels like we're losing our peace, that's a good indication. This is what I tell the families I'm working with. It might take you 20 minutes. It might take you all day to realize, oh, I'm going down a bad path here. I'm not feeling good. I'm feeling fearful. But the minute you find that, if you shift your focus back to God and say, what is the truth in this moment? He is peace, and he will bring you peace, and he'll tell you the next step.
That is a lot different than just doing breathing exercises or saying yoga will help, which may be a good thing in your routine, but it does not replace what you're saying, which is an active God who is fighting to give you peace in that moment. Speak to an atheist this morning who's like, okay, good for you religious people, you Christian people, but I don't quite get it, and I don't know, that works for you, but it probably wouldn't work for me. Where's the hurdle? What do you have to work through to get what you are all talking about if you're from the outside looking in?
Well, I think the conflict in the Middle East is a perfect example of this. You're right that dropping a few bombs isn't going to bring resolution long term, because you go back, these are thousands years old societies. These conflicts aren't new, and it goes back to not fundamentally a geopolitical problem. It goes back to a spiritual problem. It's the problem of human sin that affects every nation, every culture, and every individual as well. That's why we face these issues. And ultimately, the only way to have that inner subjective peace that we're talking about, where I can have the calm in the storm, is to have outer objective peace with God. And peace with God, see, we're all at war with God because of sin, right? The only way that peace comes with God is through Christ, who took the punishment that sinners deserve so that we could have reconciliation with our Father and we wouldn't have to suffer his wrath. It ultimately starts there. Once you have that objective peace, once you know that you've been reconciled with the one who holds all things, then having that subjective inner peace is a lot easier, because every other situation pales in comparison to having that issue settled.
That's the final word, and it's a good one. Thank you all very much. Well, coming up on Morning Light, he's the host of Lighthouse TV's Face the Issues. He's also an award-winning political scientist, an analyst, an author, and a college professor. Debra's going to sit down with our friend Sam Chen one-on-one up next. You're watching Morning Light on Lighthouse TV.
Trump 2028. President Trump has hinted at potentially running for a third term for president. But what if I told you that all the shade and heat being thrown on this issue, President Trump isn't the first one who has recommended this?
And you were just listening to a recent episode of Face the Issues with Sam Chen. Face the Issues is Lighthouse TV's public affairs program. Each week, the show focuses on one topic, from politics to health. Joining us is the host, Sam Chen. Thank you for being with us.
Debra, thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun.
So tell us about Face the Issues.
Yeah, like you said, it's the public affairs program here at Lighthouse TV. And so every week we take one issue and we break it down from its 30,000 foot level ideas all the way down to how does this impact our neighbors and our communities. Is there a solution to the issue that we're facing? There's no question that we won't chase on that show.
So talk to us about some of the issues.
Yeah, so anything that is relevant today. So we've done politics, economics, healthcare, wellness. We just did a mini series on generative AI, where your co-host Jeff Coleman was one of our guests. During COVID, we did a whole series on understanding COVID, its impact in different parts of the community. So no issue is off limits. We take national, international issues and talk about how it impacts local communities. We also take local issues and talk about how it impacts the state or the nation.
So tell us a little bit more about the AI. We were talking about that earlier.
Yeah, so generative AI is right in those things where it's not going away. And so we need to understand it. Whether we like it or hate it, we need to understand it. And so we did a whole series about what is it? So there's so much misinformation about what it is, what it does. And then the conversation of what would its role or limits be in different fields, whether that's business and marketing or ministry or politics or the digital arts, higher education. Should there be a role? What would that look like? And it's different perspectives from our different guests who are all experts in the field, but kind of a conclusion of one, it's not going away, we need to understand it. And secondly, there's a lack of a human element in AI. And so what is our moral responsibility if we are to use it? And how do we keep the humanity in all of that?
Yeah, that's very interesting. And when you say you have experts, talk to us about some of your guests.
Yeah, so the idea here is that we want to help our viewers understand the issues for what they're worth and not through their talking points, which is so much of what news is today, just talking points. So we're going to bring experts in the field. And so in the past, we've had Tom Kidd, who's one of America's leading religious historians, talking about America's founding and the role that religion played, what parts are overblown, what parts are misunderstood. We've had Gordon Voigt is a former sports anchor, Heisman Trophy voter, sports agent. He does all of this stuff around NIL and the transfer portal and those changes that are coming to NC2A. Jeff Coleman's been on talking about politics and civility, how we understand some of the political anxiety that we have in our society. We've had doctors on, hospital CEOs, and then we also have guests that are human interest stories. So incredible people who have their lives and the way they live have inspired us. The challenges that they've overcome have inspired us, and we get the opportunity to share their stories.
Yeah. So what do you hope to accomplish by digging deeper into these topics?
I think the goal is that our society, we react emotionally to news. We said earlier about, you pull up your phone, you see all this news, and we get these quick knee-jerk reactions to it. What would it look like in our society if we responded thoughtfully to these issues? But to do that, we need to understand them. We can't just have information. We need to really have understanding that leads to wisdom. And so what we try to do is really take that issue every week and just unpack it and give some of that understanding that leads to wisdom.
What type of reaction are you receiving from viewers?
Mostly positive. There is a hunger, I believe, for those longer form interviews, for those really in-depth conversations. You see the explosion of podcasts are kind of driving that or a sign of that. So I've been very grateful, mostly positive. I think most negative comments come in the summer where I wear a tan suit from time to time, and that usually gets viewers up in arms a little bit.
But they're looking for this. They're looking for more direction. They don't want to just read those one-liners.
Yeah, I really think that's the appetite, that the quick one-liners, zingers, those are fun, right? Zingers are great fun. But the shedding of heat gets old and people get tired of it. And what they really want is someone that can shed light on things. And so we have the great opportunity, I'm super grateful for the opportunity to do that. And I really think that's what the public is looking for.
Okay, Sam, we do need to take a break, but we do want to talk to you much more about your own personal faith journey.
Sounds good.
So coming up next on Morning Light, you probably did not know this. Sam studied philosophy in college. As I mentioned, he will share his faith journey with us. We're back in 1 minute. Welcome back. In our last segment, Sam Chen shared his journey to becoming host of Face the Issues right here on Lighthouse TV. Now he's back to share his faith journey with us. So talk to us more about your faith journey.
Yeah, I grew up in a Christian home. Both my parents were in ministry. And so I came to accept Christ as my Lord and Savior from a very, very young age. And so my mother always taught me, if you drink or eat something that's poisonous, you won't see mom or dad anymore. That was always kind of the message for a little toddler about poison. And so when I was about 5 or 6, she said the same thing about faith. If you don't accept Christ, you won't see mom or dad, but that's forever. And so I was like, well, yeah, that's not going to happen. So I accepted Christ. And I don't think I really understood it. But I grew up in the church, I served, I was attentive in Sunday school. And I really, in my middle school, high school years, really became an intellectual faith. And so I was reading Lee Strobel's Case for Christ, Case for Faith in middle school, Josh McDowell's Evidence That Demands a Verdict in high school, Norman Geisler's Christian Apologetics, and really was able to defend the faith. And for me, that's why I believed. And that got me through really rough patches in my life where the church hurt, for example, where you don't want to be a Christian anymore. But intellectually, I knew this was true. And that really was my anchor. But it wasn't until late college, early graduate school where I really had this encounter with Jesus and realized that faith is more than a set of beliefs. It's an identity. It's a comprehensive form of life, and it's who we are. And that really shifted my entire trajectory from that point on.
Yeah. So how did it transform your life at that point?
I think what happens is when it's a belief, it's something that you defend, it's something that you believe, something you speak about. But when it becomes a form of life, it has to change how you live. And I was also going through grad school and then starting to walk into my career. And so this is not so much here's my belief and here's what I'm doing, but now that faith has to inform what I'm doing. And so everything as I go through my career is now thinking through how do I treat the person that's in front of me? What is not just the goal of this project, but what is the larger goal of my being here? What's the purpose of that? So I'll give you one example. As an academic, we speak at conferences all the time. And I have a bit of a reputation for being a jerk. And so if someone asks what I considered a stupid question, I usually snap back at them. And a lot of that was me being insecure. I was usually the youngest in the room, and I felt like I had to prove that I belonged intellectually. And so I would have these quips and these snapbacks. But as I stepped into this identity, it started becoming, well, why are we shedding heat instead of light? Like, what part of being a Christ follower says that we're supposed to be shedding heat? I mean, we don't even see that in Christ when they're arresting him for his crucifixion. And so this shift begins of less, here is the issue. I'm not apologizing for my views or my arguments, but here's the issue and here's the person who's asking, and responding to that person as opposed to reacting to the issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was a big transformation.
Absolutely.
So you really are involved in so many different things.
so to speak.
So share with us how you got involved with Lighthouse TV.
Yeah, so I've been involved in politics for, longer than I would like to think right now. And done a lot of commentary over the years, and actually Lighthouse TV show, Larry Bird has a show on our network. It was the show before his last show, and he had invited me to come on to do an interview on the intersection of church and state, which is the area of my academic research, and faith and politics and things like that. And so on the heels of that, a few years later, the owners of our network gave me a call, and they said they were revamping our lineup of shows, and they needed a public affairs show, and they graciously asked if I would host it. And we're in our 8th season and loving every moment of it.
And you're also involved with teaching and a pastor as well.
Yeah, I'm super grateful I get to do government, political science pragmatically as a consultant and a strategist, as a commentator, but also academically. And that was always the dream, and God's been super, super good to me and letting me do both. And I serve as a teaching associate at my local church, and that's just such a blessing, getting to bring the word to God's people every few weeks, and super blessed to be able to do that.
Great. Well, Sam, we really love having you on Lighthouse TV. And thank you so much for stopping by our studios here at Morning Light.
Thank you for having me, Debra.
You're welcome. And Face the Issues with Sam airs on Lighthouse TV on Tuesdays and Fridays at 8:30 in the evening and Saturdays at 4:30. Stay with us. We're back right after the break. Welcome back. Coming up tomorrow on Morning Light, using 4 paws to reach 1 heart. The mission of Cover 6 Canines is to help assist veterans and first responders in securing and training service dogs at no cost. Meet the organization's president and his 4-legged friend, something you won't want to miss. And that's a look at what's coming up tomorrow on Morning Light. Now, Jeff, your closing thoughts.
I think we'll bring our dogs tomorrow.
Good idea.
Yeah. Well, on Saturday, I explored the west end of Louisville, Kentucky, once the Harlem of the South, where Muhammad Ali grew up and Martin Luther King and his brother A.D. preached. On a steaming hot Saturday, churches were giving out gift cards and meals, standing on street corners, offering to pray with you. No judgment. But it was inside Eric Hansberry's chair at T&B Classic Barbershop on the corner of Muhammad Ali Boulevard where I found the heart of Louisville. Eric's been cutting hair 36 years. The shop's been there since 1961. Before I could introduce myself, Eric knew my name because he's an expert listener. Depending on the customer, he's a counselor, he's a therapist, he's a stepdad, he's a pastor, and a neighborhood uncle. We talked about meeting Ali, about his church, about Jesus. He doesn't know how anyone can deny that truth. But Eric wasn't in a hurry with me and with anyone who came in that shop. He's a master barber. But you get the sense he gives grace because he's experienced grace too. Every person who came in that shop that Saturday experienced it. When you're in Louisville and you want a good, healthy dose of grace, go see Eric. For Debra and the entire Morning Light team, I'm Jeff Kocman. Thanks for watching. Remember, it's hot out there, so it's a good time to go check on your neighbors, and then God willing, we'll meet back here again tomorrow morning.